Hi and welcome to Tuesday Night Live. Lovely to be with you, and whether you're watching live tonight or getting this on demand, watching or listening to it through the week, a very, very warm welcome to you. We're going to get into some really interesting stuff tonight, particularly on creation, evolution, the age of the earth. Is Genesis 1 literal or figurative? How do we reconcile a young earth with people telling us, for example, that Australia's Indigenous people have lived in this country for 50,000 years? All of those sort of things. So I think we'll probably spend most of the time on that. But if you do have questions, you can pop those into the chat feed and they will come up, and I'll do my very best to get to those as well. G'day, Cameron. He's on his way to the gym again. My goodness, mate, you'll become huge. And he's going to tune in more when he gets there. Good on you. Hope you work hard. Do a few reps for me while you're at it. G'day to Carrie. Hi, Grant. And g'day to Ross. Make sure you pop in a thing. Say hello. The comment should come through from Facebook and also from YouTube, I'm hoping, although I have noticed, I go back through all the comments either on Tuesday night or quite often on Wednesday, and I've noticed that some of them don't come through for whatever reason. So if I haven't said hello to you or answered your question or whatever, don't worry, I will get to it. I will see it tonight or tomorrow, and I'll do my very, very best to answer your question or to read out your comment. Talking of which, had a number of comments lately. Let me read a couple of these to you. Here's a lady. She and her husband live in New South Wales, and she says, "Hi, Rob. I just wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to do the Tuesday Night Lives. My husband and I really enjoyed listening to it last night, and quite honestly, it was a relief to hear you address those issues with such a sense of grace and common sense. It's a rare combination nowadays, sadly, isn't it? As I think I've said before, we've been feeling pretty spiritually isolated and despondent due to the churches here of different denominations being so highly influenced by a very conservative man and his movement. But connecting to your church online has been a breath of fresh air. I feel a greater connection to God's love and presence directly after listening to your message. So thank you. And thank you for taking the time to write that. That's really encouraging, and hey, that's why I do what I'm doing here, and I'm really glad it's hitting the spot with a lot of people, which is so good. Someone else says, loving Tuesday night sessions again, learning so much from your wealth of wisdom. All that you teach very much resonates with me. Thank you for all you do. So a couple of nice comments there. G'day to Mark. Hi, mate. I'm going to get to your question tonight, Mark, a little bit later. G'day, Graham. Graham asked me a great question as well. In fact, I went and spent a couple of hours with Graham week before last, and he gave me a question while I was sitting there having a coffee with him, and I'll try and get to it tonight. We see how we go with all that we're going to be touching on. But if not tonight, next Tuesday night, Graham, I promise. And hi to Gaynor as well, and g'day to Rachel. Okay, let's get into, there's two questions particularly on creation / evolution, age of the earth, how that fits in with science, all of that kind of thing, which I think is a really interesting topic. So let me read this question to you. This is number one. Something I have always struggled with is the age of our planet and the universe. Christians say creation was approximately 7,000 years ago, I believe, although I can't remember reading that in the Bible. There's a good reason for that. Scientists say billions of years ago, and dinosaurs lived hundreds of millions of years ago. Science and Christianity go hand in hand, I believe, but I struggle with this one. All right, so let me try and address this the best way I can. And I'll take this question line by line because there's quite a lot of nuance in the question. So first of all, Christians say creation was approximately 7,000 years ago, I believe, although I can't remember reading that in the Bible. There's a very good reason for that, and that is it's not in the Bible, okay? Where Christians today get the age of the earth from, and look, I don't know that this is something that Christians have believed over the last 2,000 years. I doubt it. I spent some time today with a very dear friend of mine who is a rabbi, and he's someone I love to chat with. And so I sent him a text yesterday and I said, look, love to spend an hour with you. And so we Zoomed today and just kind of picked his brains on some of this from a Jewish perspective, from a Hebrew perspective. And so that was very, very helpful. So from his perspective, the earth is not young, okay? But I'll go into that a little bit more in a moment. Where Christians today get this from is from a guy called Archbishop Usher, James Usher, Usser, no relation to the R&B singer. He was alive and well in the 17th century, and he put a chronology together of the history of the world formulated from a literal reading of the Old Testament. So dear Archbishop James Usher, he was the Archbishop of Armagh in Ireland, and he was the primate of all Ireland. Now, I know that's a religious office, but I wonder why they picked the word primate, because that means monkey as well? I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm sure he was not a monkey. I'm sure he was a wonderful archbishop. But when it comes to dating the earth in this way, you could certainly say it was a bit of monkey business. So Christians say that the earth is only 7,000 years old. That actually is not completely accurate. Christians have a number of views on this topic. In fact, we Christians have a number of views on lots of topics. So let me just share those with you. So some Christians believe in a young earth creation. So they will take literally the words of Genesis chapter 1, that God specifically created, and there's a bit of wiggle room here with young earth creationists. They'll say somewhere around 6,000 years, maximum of 10,000 years. They would say that the Bible disagrees with science. They would say that science has it wrong on this because it is anti-God, okay? And so they would be some of the things that you would hear from people who are young earth creationists. And hey, there are whole ministries that are based on this. I think, wasn't it the Answers in Genesis used to be Christian Science Foundation, and then it had to change its name to Answers in Genesis. I think maybe it's called something else these days. I'm really not sure. So Ken Ham, who heads that up, he would be a believer in young earth creation. The second kind of view that Christians have on this is the old earth creation. And old earth creationists say that God specifically created, but it was billions of years ago. This view agrees with science that says the universe is around 13.8 billion years old and the earth is relatively young in comparison. It's only 4.5 billion years old. A third view is theistic evolution, and that basically believes or states that God initiated evolution, the evolutionary process. He's behind it, and he kind of loosely directs it, okay? And so what we have today is an evolved world, and God is behind evolution. And then the fourth view, which is the one I resonate with the most, I got to say, is intelligent design. Intelligent design says that God is creator, but the creation has changed or adapted over time. It agrees with science that the world is very old and it's progressing, that it's actually getting better. And as you look at history, you see the world is advancing in lots and lots of ways. I know that in more recent times, of course, human activity has set some of that back. And so, you know, the challenge that we have at the moment with the environment, since the Industrial Revolution, pumping lots of pollution into the atmosphere, all of those things, obviously humankind has an impact on the creation, either for good or for evil, or a mixture of the two. So at the moment, we're doing some great stuff on the planet. We're also doing some really bad stuff, deforestation, all of those sorts of things, which, you know, I was reading a very interesting article yesterday, by the by, but talking about how deforestation and human beings moving into habitats where we have not been previously will possibly lead to an increase in epidemics and even pandemics in time to come. So we need to look after our environment. But anyway, back to Genesis. So the intelligent design view is that Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3 is Hebraic or Hebrew poetry or Hebrew creative writing, not poetry in the Western sense of poetry, but more of an Eastern style, okay? And the Genesis 3 is truth as meaning rather than truth as fact. I taught a message at Bayside 2, maybe 3 years ago, and it was called, Is the Bible Really True? And I talked about truth as fact, truth as meaning, and truth as life. And so when we're reading the Bible, we need to discern, am I reading fact here, or is there a meaning here? So with a lot of the Bible's poetry, for example, so the poetry section in the Hebrew scriptures, which includes Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, Psalms, Proverbs, and the book of Job, that's poetry. So that is often truth as meaning, okay? So example there, Psalm 139 talks about God knitting us together in the womb, and then it says, and then he knits us together in the caverns of the earth, or the caves of the earth. Now we know that babies are not knitted in caves, okay? So when it comes to the Psalms, they use what we still use in our songs and our poems today, poetic license. And so it's not truth as fact, but it's rather truth as meaning. We have Christy's parents staying with us at the moment. They arrived a year ago last Friday. They came for a 5-week holiday. So they arrived on the 19th of March, 2020, and Australia closed its borders on the 20th of March last year. This time last year, Daniel Andrews, our Premier, had just got up and talked about, you know, lockdown and what it means and how long it would last and all of that kind of stuff. So we've lived through that year, and Christy's mum and dad are still with us. My in-laws are still here. Now, they're getting on in years, okay? I won't tell you how old my father-in-law is, but he's well into his 80s now. And so I could use a statement that would be truth as meaning. I could say, Granddad is as old as the hills. Now, is that truth as fact? No, it's not. I know most hills, the vast majority of hills on planet Earth, would be much, much older than Granddad. But if I use that statement, you know exactly what I mean. Granddad is as old as the hills. It's truth. It's truth as meaning. He is old. There's also another truth in there that one day, like all of us, when we die, he will go back to be dust, just like I will and you will when we die. From dust we came, and from dust we will return. That's the material part of us. Of course, our spirit, well, that's another matter. So what we find in Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3 are a lot of statements like that. And so Hebraically, and this was from my discussions today with my rabbi friend, science and theology are asking two different questions. And this is really important in understanding, because I actually see science and theology as really good mates. We should be able to walk hand in hand rather than saying, you're the enemy, you've got it wrong, I'm right, because I've got the Bible and I've dated stuff, and the Bible is, well, as Bishop Ussher said, he thought that the earth, and this is from the 17th century, was 5,650 years old. He believed that creation had happened in the year 3,952 BC. So Isaac Newton, who, I mean, he was a really bright guy. He was a very intelligent man, but he believed that creation happened in 3,998 BC. So he and Bishop Ussher disagreed on that. I disagree with both of them. I think God's creation happened a long, long time ago. I believe that God is an intelligent being that is behind the world and the universe and all of the creation, and that I would agree with the Hebrews that science and theology are good friends but are different and are asking two different questions. So what are they? When it comes to science, what and how are the questions that science will ask? How old is the universe? How old is the earth? How was the universe created? What happened to the dinosaurs? All of those sorts of questions are science questions. They're what and how questions. They are not questions that the Bible is trying to answer. So we get those answers from science. Theology doesn't ask what and how so much as why. So when it comes to the Bible, we find out the why. Why are we here on this planet? Why did God create the world? Why did God make people in his image? So they're the questions that theology will ask. And really, when you think about it, they're the really deep questions of life. I love what our scientists discover and what they're still discovering, and there's a whole lot more there. I think God kind of made creation like a divine treasure hunt. And so he's like, okay, I'm giving you this world, go for it, discover. And people have discovered and are discovering and will discover more in the future of what God has hidden in his creation. And so that distinction is really important. Science is all about the what and the how. Theology is about the why. And so theology is about wonder. It's about awe. It's about questions. It's about being at rest with the unanswerable, that there are going to be a whole lot of our questions that we will probably have until we go and be with Jesus. And it's fine. We're okay. We can live with mystery. We can live in the tension of the knowing and the not knowing. Theology is about enjoying the journey as it is about as much as it is about enjoying the destination. And hopefully that's the same for scientists as well. Hopefully our scientists are enjoying the journey of discovery. And, people like Stephen Hawking, when he was alive, coming up with a theory and then with his amazing brain working through whether the theory was right or wrong. And, just coming up with all of that stuff and enjoying the journey as much as the destination. From a Hebrew perspective, the Jewish year, right now, of course, in the Western world, we're in the year 2021. The Hebrews are in the year 5781. And so the fundamentalist Jews or the literalist Jews will say that science is wrong, just like many fundamentalist or literalist Christians would do. Science is wrong, according to them, because they're saying that the year 5781 is dated back to the creation of the universe, whereas the majority of Jews today would say that that's an approximation of when their scriptures began rather than when creation started. And the other thing that's really interesting here is that Judaism thinks in cycles, not in a linear fashion. So if you're from a Western culture like I am, we've been heavily influenced by Greek thinking over the last few thousand years, couple of thousand years or more. And so our thinking is very much start, stop, and everything in between progresses. So it started here, it stops there, and this is a progression. And we can bring that mindset then to the Bible, and the Bible doesn't read like a novel. It doesn't start here and finish there. And so, in the Hebrew scriptures, for example, you've got the first 5 books, which are a story in and of themselves. And then you've got history books, which are stories in themselves as well. But then the history will then repeat. and because it was written at a different time. And so Hebrew historians weren't necessarily interested just in facts. They were interested in the story. And so you'll find in the Bible that the same accounts of the same, different accounts of the same story will have different ingredients in it. Sometimes the facts are changed from one account to another account. Why? Because the Hebrews weren't interested in historical fact. They weren't interested in history as fact. They were interested in history as story. It was his story. What can we learn from the story? And so then in the Hebrew scriptures, you get into the prophetical books, same thing. Same in the New Testament. Book of Revelation is not starts here, finishes there. It's all written in cycles. And so when you understand that, the Bible actually starts coming alive to you. And the thing about history is really important. So as a Western-minded person, I read history because I want to know the facts of the past. And that's interesting, but it's not the main thing. I need to learn from the story of the past. And so really the facts should take the back seat to the story. The beginning of Genesis is giving us the why of what we see in the world. And so explaining the why the universe and the world were made. That's what Genesis chapter 1, chapter 2 particularly are all about. And it includes stories that are meant to convey meaning, not just fact. And so if you're looking for facts, you get stuck on stuff. I mean, think about it for a moment. You've got Adam and Eve, two people who God created, and then they have a son, Abel, and then they have another son, Cain. And in the next part of the story, that the boys get into a disagreement and Cain kills his brother. And then you read on in the next few verses and suddenly there's all these other people on the planet. Cain has a wife, he's got kids. Hang on a sec, I can do the maths. Adam and Eve, two people, they make love, and the result is Abel. The next result is Cain. Cain kills Abel, and then there's all these other people. Where did Cain get his wife from? Where did all the other people come from? And all of this kind of stuff. If you're just looking for these stories as truth, as fact, you're actually going to come unstuck, because were they real people? Where did all these people come from? What we actually need to ask ourselves about Genesis and these stories is, what can I learn from the story? And that's the stuff that actually impacts your life and my life today. Knowing where Cain got his wife from might be an interesting question, but it's not really going to impact my life today. Now, I know the answer to that. Where did Cain get his wife from? The answer is this: I would tell you if I were able. Tish boom. So there we go. The question we need to ask ourselves is, what do we learn from the story? Lots of great stuff. Cain says in the story, for example, am I my brother's keeper? Which is a very offhand way of saying to God, how would I know where Abel is? You go find him. Of course, Cain already knew he'd killed Abel. Am I my brother's keeper? The answer to the question is yes, I am. So every other human being is my brother or sister. And am I their keeper? Yes, I am. And that's reflected in the New Testament scriptures. If you think about where it says, if someone in this world comes to you and they're in need and you have the wherewithal to help them and you don't help them, then you're not being a brother or a sister to that person. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, I am. That's what we learn from the story. What else do we learn from the story? Murder is wrong. What else do we learn from the story? Well, blood cries out from the ground. Now, is that truth as fact? If I cut my finger and my blood spills on the ground, does my blood start yelling out, what'd you do that for? No, of course not. But what does it mean there? Blood cries out. Everything has a voice. And God is saying here, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. The blood was crying out vengeance. When you get into Hebrews chapter 13, I think it is, the writer there talks about the blood of Jesus speaking a different message to the blood of Abel. So the blood of Abel is crying out for vengeance. The blood of Jesus cries out give them grace, give them forgiveness, give them blessing, give them love. We can learn so much from these stories. The story of Cain and Abel, we learn that God is just and he's also kind. He punished Cain, but he didn't kill Cain, even though you can find scriptures in the Hebrew scriptures as well as in the New Testament that endorse capital punishment. But here, right at the beginning, we see God saying, I could kill you, Cain, but I choose not to. And I'm going to limit the judgment, and I'm going to stop other people from adding to the judgment. And so we see there the justice and the kindness of God. Let me give you a few takeaways here on this before we take a quick break. Takeaway number one, if you want to have a healthy discussion about Genesis with someone else who has a different view to you, throw out the dates and times and focus on the truth. So, for example, maybe you believe in theistic evolution, just using this as an example. So you believe that God initiated and oversees the process of evolution. And then you talk to someone who is a young earth creationist who believes that Genesis chapter 1 is literal, 6 literal 24-hour days, and that's how God made the earth about 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. Now, you can spend all your time arguing with each other about those things and trying to convince the other person to take on your point of view. But imagine you both love Jesus, right? You both love the Lord. You're followers of Jesus Christ. You're a disciple of Jesus. You love the word. You read, you study the word. And in your reading and studying, you've come up with different answers to something that doesn't affect your salvation. And so this whether if you believe in theistic evolution, you're not going to hell, right? You don't have to believe, pardon me, that the earth was created in 6 literal days. God's not going to tick that off before he lets you into heaven, right? So, okay, young earth creationist and all these other things you got right. Yep, okay, you can come in. Oh, you believed in evolution, did you? Sorry, off you go. You know, bit John Cleese-ish. Rather, why don't you just leave out the dates and times and focus on the truth? What can we learn from the stories that we read in Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3? So that's takeaway number one. You might want to use the word, instead of saying day, you might want to say time, okay? Number two, science and theology can find the common ground that we're looking for when we allow each to be what they were intended to be. So science and theology can be great friends when we realize one asks how and the other asks why. Number three, does it matter how old creation was? Does it really matter? I mean, none of us were there, right? Even Granddad, who's as old as the hills, he wasn't there at creation. So how do you know what it was like back then? How do you really know? How can you say for sure God did it this way and everybody else that doesn't believe my way is wrong? I think we should actually go into discussions by saying, this is what I believe. I could be wrong. Why don't you tell me what you believe and why? And then get into a really healthy, respectful discussion on these things. And so think about the time before you were born. For example, how do you know about the time before you were born? From your family, for example, what have they told you? They've told you stories about people, right? And so the time before we were born, it's like our dream time. And time's interesting here too, because time is not always measured in literal 24-hour periods. Sometimes time seems like it's going faster, other times it's slower. So, for example, time slows down the denser the gravity. So if you get into a place that has incredibly dense gravity, like a black hole, for example, and this is where we can lean on science, because the Bible doesn't give us a revelation about black holes, but science does, and they tell us that time almost stands still inside a black hole because the gravity is so dense. So time moves faster and slower depending on what's happening around you. The older you get, the faster time appears to go. I think about the time when I was a kid, and especially, sort of a young kid, and even in my teenage years over in Perth, in Western Australia, where summers were always and only ever hot. And they went on forever. You know, you'd break up for school, and the school holidays were what, 6 weeks? But those 6 weeks just went on forever and ever and ever. And then finally you went back to school again. Summers go so fast now. Why? Because the older you get, the faster summers go. And so we know about the time before us by listening to stories. I know about my family by listening to what my mum told me when she was alive about her parents and her grandparents and the dog she had as a child when she was growing up in London. The bombings of London, the Battle of Britain, when she got evacuated to the country. My dad got evacuated to the country during the war, so they were out of the bombing, and then stories of her parents and their parents and all of that. And so I only know that. I don't know that as fact. I know it as story and meaning. And so for me, that's like my dream time. Okay. We talk about our Indigenous people here in Australia, and they have their stories of dream time. When you're dreaming, by the way, have you noticed how a dream can feel like it's going on forever? But, you know, again, scientists have found out that dreams can last just a few seconds sometimes, or maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes. A long dream would be half an hour. And yet when you're in the midst of the dream, it seems like it goes on forever and ever and ever. Ever had one of those dreams where you wake up when the dream's over, you wake up and you go, oh, thank goodness that wasn't real. Whew. You know, it's like when I dreamt that I was preaching at Bayside Church years and years and years ago, and I'd forgotten to get dressed. And I'm preaching and I'm like, why didn't I put clothes on? And it was horrible. Anyway, I'm sure we've all had dreams like that. And so our Indigenous people have the dream time. Are they truth as fact? No, they're truth as meaning, but they learn about their past. And my rabbi friend told me today, he said, for Hebrews, Genesis is like the Hebrew dream time. Okay, it's truth as meaning. Takeaway number 4, maybe people who get bogged down in dates and times are trying to prove something. That is, that they are right and everybody else who doesn't believe what they believe is wrong. And can I ask, why is it such a big deal? Why does it matter so much to prove that this is right and that's wrong, when we've already seen in the example of Cain and Abel, the real truth of meaning that we want to draw out of these stories that applies to us today is not the facts of the story. Takeaway number 5. Does what you believe make you more compassionate? Now, this is a great question. And whatever we read in the Bible, this needs to be a question that we ask. What I believe, does what I believe make me more compassionate? Does what I believe close down imagination and questions? So I'm right, you're wrong, that's the end of the story. Well, suddenly there's no point in questioning because the person's right and I'm wrong. There's no point in imagining and dreaming and all of the creativity that God has placed within our heart and our mind. Why bother with all of that if it's all cut and dried and all abundantly clear? If we're going to have any kind of rich dialogue, enriching dialogue rather, we need to use our imagination. We need to reimagine old perceptions. We need to reimagine ancient texts. And then the final takeaway, number 6, the Bible isn't a science book, it's a love story. And this is so important. People that turn the Bible into a science book, it's truth as fact, and it becomes very cold and very clinical. And we need to see the Bible as a love story. It's a love story about God and people. It's about redemption and reconciliation. So let's not reduce it down to a book of facts, please. Let's see it for what it really is, this magnificent love story that God is communicating with us. I mean, think about it for a moment. You know, God could have given us like a notepad, or he could have given us one sheet. And on side 1, it could have been things to do. And on the second side, it could be things not to do. There you go. There's your sheet. Off you go. Don't do the things on the front cover. Do the things on the back cover. And that's it. But instead, God has given us this incredible book that is full of poetry and history and prophecy and letters and apocalypses and all this different creative writing because that stuff, it communicates, it's timeless. So facts come and go, but truth as meaning is timeless. The story of Cain and Abel, however many thousands of years ago that actually happened, is immaterial. The fact is, and the timing of it doesn't impact my life now, but the truth as meaning that I drew out of that story, and a whole lot of other truth as meaning that you could draw out of that story, that's timeless. It applied 3,000, 4,000, 10,000 years ago. It applies today. It'll still be true in 100 years' time. So I really hope that helps. I'm going to keep going on that topic in just a moment, but I just want to say hi to a few people here and catch up. So Russ, I'm in good company, mate. Old Earth. Hi to Jan. James says that he loves the why. Absolutely. Jan says, thanks for your Bible talks. My absolute pleasure, Jan. Glad you're enjoying it. Russ, what's this? Genesis 13. God makes plants. Genesis 14, God makes the stars. Oh, no, I think you mean 1:3. Genesis 1:3, God makes plants. Genesis 1:4, God makes the stars and the sun. That still blows my mind. He made these in an order that seems illogical. Totally. So God created light before he created the source of light. He said, let there be light. And then later on, next day or two, he created the sun. So, is it truth as fact or is it truth as meaning? Mark, here we go. Thank you. Got a call from my daughter to pick her up from the station at the exact moment as you started to answer my question, so we'll replay. No worries at all, Mark. Good on you, mate. If there is no sun or moon, then how long is a day? Great question. Great question. I don't know. Rachel says, on day one, God said, let there be light. So maybe this was the source until the sun was created. I don't know. It could be. Yes, James, I'm with you. Thank goodness I am not dreaming. Oh, dear me. And Grant says, this is very helpful. Love it. So glad you guys. Hope you're enjoying this. A quick commercial break, and then I'll get into the second question on this same topic. And that is, this Sunday's Palm Sunday, which means the following weekend is the Easter weekend, okay? So Friday week is Good Friday and Sunday week is Easter Sunday. And at Bayside, we have a Good Friday service and an Easter Sunday service. So they're both at 10 a.m. And for these two services, we're also live streaming. So Bayside Church Online will be live streamed what is actually happening in the auditorium that weekend, okay? So Friday morning at 10, Good Friday morning, 10 o'clock, and Easter Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. And if you are planning on attending in person, you have to register, okay? So it's a ticketed event. Please follow the links on the Bayside Church website to secure your tickets to our Easter services. You will need a ticket for entry into both services. The tickets are absolutely free. All you have to do is register and then bring that with you, okay? So the thing is, with COVID, we are restricted in numbers. And so it's very important that you pre-register, because if you don't pre-register, we believe we will fill up the auditorium both Good Friday and Easter Sunday. I mean, we normally get attendances of 750 people. And so I think our limit at the moment in the auditorium, with being COVID-wise, is 280. So get onto the website. People are already registering. Get onto the website if you plan to come in person. Otherwise, of course, an unlimited number of people can enjoy Bayside Church Online, live streamed at those same times. Good Friday at 10 a.m, Easter Sunday at 10 a.m. The second question I've got tonight on this same topic is this. In Luke's gospel, he traces Jesus back to Adam and ultimately God. So that's Luke 3, verses 23 to 28. That's Luke's genealogy. Australian Aboriginal heritage is thought to be 20,000 plus years old. Does it need to reconcile? Great questions. And I think, Mark, this is actually your question. So it's just very similar to the previous one. So Australia's Indigenous people, scientists tell us, have been living in this country for about 50,000 years. It's probably longer than that. Recent archaeological evidence from the analysis of charcoal and artifacts revealing human use suggests a date as early as 65,000 years ago, which is a very long time ago, isn't it, for Australia's Indigenous people? If that is the case, I believe that makes Australia's Indigenous people the oldest continuous living nation that's still in its same country. Fascinating, of course, when British settlers first turned up and they announced it was it Terra Nullis, the land belonging to nobody, and then, of course, behaved accordingly. But that's a different topic. Do these figures need to reconcile with the genealogy in Luke? The genealogy suggesting, obviously, that the earth is much younger, if we were to take those genealogies literally, much younger than 50,000 or 65,000 years. Do these figures need to reconcile with the genealogy in Luke? And the answer is clearly no, okay? They don't have to reconcile. There are a number of reasons for that. The first is that Hebrew genealogies actually leave people out. So again, remember what I said earlier, Hebrew history was not about fact. It was about story and the truth that we can glean from the stories. So Matthew has a genealogy in Matthew chapter 1, which is different to the genealogy that we find of Jesus in Luke chapter 3. So they're two completely different genealogies. Matthew leaves a whole ton of people out, and he actually puts them in groups of 14. So you find there's 14 generations and then a gap, and then 14 generations and a gap, and then 14 generations and a gap. And he leaves people out because he wanted to make sure that his little pattern of 14, 14, 14 played out. And I'm sure there's a good reason for that. I can't remember what it is. If you're interested, I could maybe do some research on that and touch on it next week. So Hebrew genealogies leave people out. The Hebrews, by the way, would often write a genealogy after they had a census. And we find a number of these censi in Scripture, where they would have a census of the people, and then they would write out the genealogies. And you find some of the genealogies, they go on for chapter after chapter in Chronicles, for example, and it's not inspiring reading. But it does tell us that the Hebrews thought that this was very, very important. So they would have a census after a crisis. So after a crisis, they would take stock of where they were at. We've had a crisis. This is where we find ourselves right now. And they would reflect on their past, where they'd come from, the stories of the past, the stories that they needed in the present that connected them to their past, what was important to them as they embraced the future. They would then connect the present to the past, the people and the stories, and they would bring that into the present, and then they would take that whole thing into the future. What a beautiful way to live. I wonder if you're thinking right now, hey, isn't the world in a crisis? Absolutely. We're in a once in 100 year crisis. And I hope this doesn't happen for another 100 years or more. Who would have ever thought that we got to live through something that history books will record, and people in 100 years, just like we look back and we read about the Spanish flu, people in 100 years will look back and they will read about COVID-19 and what it was like in planet Earth around there. We can read history. I've been spending time reading history of previous pandemics because I wanted to hear the stories. How did people react? How did they cope? How did society change? All of those things. And then you learn so much from that, and you can bring that into the present. One of the things that's really helped me is reading that history, because I've realized that a global pandemic brings massive change into the world. Every time there's been a pandemic, there's been a seismic shift in culture. And so what can we expect this time? What can we learn from the stories of the past, the people of the past, to help us in the present, and then take those into our future and embrace our future together? And so this crisis helps us take stock as a society, as a nation here in Australia, other nations, helps us to take stock. What is really important in life? The number of people that have told me that they are so glad that they actually were able to get off the hamster wheel, you know, the activity that was always happening. And last year we got off the hamster wheel. Number of people have said to me, I don't want to get back on the hamster wheel. And they've made life decisions that have, through this crisis, that have impacted them in the present, that they will take into their future with them. That's what we can learn from a genealogy. In Luke's genealogy, he's attempting to do two things. The first thing is he's trying to legitimize the early church. So don't forget, Luke is writing his letter to, we don't even know who this guy is, but he's a guy called Theophilus, and he calls him most excellent Theophilus. Luke, of course, was a doctor. He was a professional. And it's likely that he knew this man, Theophilus. This man could have been a fairly high-up politician or a statesman in some way, maybe a very well-known philosopher or businessman. And so he is inquiring to Dr. Luke because he's heard about Luke's faith and he wants to know about Luke's faith. And so what he's doing, Luke is writing a letter. The Gospel of Luke is part 1 and the book of Acts is part 2. So the book of Acts actually starts with a reference to the Gospel of Luke. If I just read this to you very quickly, in Acts chapter 1, and he picks up where he left off with this guy Theophilus. He says, in my former book, talking about the Gospel of Luke, in my former book, Theophilus, I wrote about all that Jesus began to do and teach until the day he was taken up to heaven after giving instructions through the Holy Spirit. And then that part 2 of his story to this guy Theophilus. And so he's showing to Theophilus, first of all, that Jesus connects to the past, to history, to a direct line, to authority. And he's showing how Jesus goes all the way back to Adam, who was the Son of God. Okay. And so he's legitimizing that for Theophilus. Of course, at some point in time through the first century, the letters that Paul wrote, the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, these two letters then became widely circulated. So maybe Theophilus converted to the Christian faith and became a Jesus follower and then released these letters so that they were able to be circulated amongst the churches and encourage the churches of the day. I don't think for 1 minute that Luke or Theophilus thought that we would still be circulating and reading those same letters over 2,000 millennia later, but we are. And so Luke's genealogy is legitimizing Jesus to the local church, the early church. And secondly, he is linking his interpretation of the sacred with the historical interpretation of the sacred. What I mean by that is that the Hebrew standard is always and only about people. And so it's what I said before. What can we learn from people, the stories of people? Truth has meaning. You people. All the writers of the Hebrew scriptures talk about people. When Jesus came along, he talked about people. To people who knew about the people he was talking about. If you follow my drift, you'd hear this all the way through the Hebrew scriptures, all the way through the New Testament, talking about the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. What does that tell me? Well, God is a God who's connected with the human story. I can read about how God interacted with Abraham and learn something about how God interacts with people. How did God interact with Isaac? How did he interact with Jacob, who was such a conniving, deceitful individual? And yet here we see the grace of God So you mean, wow, even when we blow it, God will still interact and be gracious to us? Yes. And how good is that? And so what we see here in Luke's genealogy is not, he's not trying to prove how old the earth is. That's a science thing, okay? Science will tell us how old the earth is. Scientists are finding how many thousands of years Australia's Indigenous people lived here before Western colonization took place. And so a human chain is what we're looking at here, not a chain of facts or belief, but a communal chain of people and shared stories that we learn from, that we bring into the present and we use to embrace the future. So, yeah, and I've just a note here regarding our Indigenous people as well. How would you stay connected to an ancient time? The way you stay connected to an ancient time is by telling the stories of the people. And so in our Indigenous culture here in Australia, our Indigenous folk talk about Dreamtime and they will tell you stories. Christy and I spent time in the outback a few years ago with a couple of other pastor couples, and it was wonderful, just interacting, spending time with, listening to our Indigenous people and the stories that they tell. The thing that fascinated us, I think, more than anything, was that in a Western culture, particularly we guys, when we meet each other for the first time, we ask two questions. What do you do? What's your name and what do you do? Tell me your name and tell me about your job, because that defines you. When you talk to an Australian Aboriginal, or in fact anyone from an Eastern mindset, an Eastern culture, which is what the Bible is written in, they will ask, what's your name? Now tell me about your family. Then the job will be somewhere down the track. That's not important to them. They want to know about your family. Tell us the stories of your family. And so that's what the Bible is. It's this stunning cyclical story of families, of people, of individuals, and what we can learn, what we can glean from them in the present. So I really, really hope that helps. Grant has said here, Pastor Rob, Australia next census exactly will be Tuesday the 10th of August this year. Yeah, which I think is wonderful, Grant. So because here we are, we're still right in the middle of a crisis, and we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we're not through it yet, and it'll take another year or two to get through this, maybe even longer, who knows. But it's fascinating that a census will take place this year. So as a country, as a nation, we need to take stock right now. And what can we learn from the past? What stories do we glean from right now? How do we reflect on that in the present? And how do we move together and embrace that in the future? So really, really hope that helps. If you got any other questions or comments, feel free to quickly pop those in there. We've only got, what do we got? About 7 or 8 minutes left. So feel free if you want to do that. My next question is probably, I think the answer to that, it's a bit long. And Graham, it's too long for me to start on the question that you asked, which is a great question, by the way. This is a little promo for next Tuesday night. Graham Crossan asked this question of me a couple of weeks ago. He said, is it ever right to fight? And he wanted me to talk about Christianity and war, Christians and war, and what the Ten Commandments say about it's wrong to kill. And then I got this text when I asked the question of Graham this afternoon about Luke chapter 19, verse 27, which is the parable of the 10 minas. The king orders those who oppose him being made king to be brought before him and killed. And how do we reconcile that? Because isn't the king here representative of Jesus? How do we reconcile that with the 10 Commandments, who say, thou shalt not kill? And here the king is saying, kill them. I will teach into that next week. And the other one I want to touch on a little bit next week, and maybe I'll just start on this now, and that's with regards to something I taught on last year, and that was about the Sabbath. And the person asking the question says, it was really enlightening to hear that Jesus fulfilled the law. So the Sabbath and such don't need to be followed now, unless you want to, of course. May I ask, does that mean the 10 Commandments don't need to be followed now? And then a little addendum on the end here. I suppose all the commandments can be summed up in Jesus' teaching, love one another as I have loved you. And you are so very right when you say that. Just very quickly here, Jesus either ended, changed, or continued teaching from the Hebrew Scriptures. And so what we see in the Gospels is a record of Jesus. Sometimes he changed statements that were made in the Hebrew Scriptures or truth from the Hebrew Scriptures. Sometimes Jesus ceased it. So the Sabbath teaching that we looked at last year as a great example, the Sabbath was ceased for those who don't want to keep the Sabbath, okay? And then other teaching from the Hebrew Scriptures, Jesus just kept it going. He continued it without changing it at all. On the subject of change, theologian C.S. Cowles wrote this: while Jesus affirmed the Hebrew Scriptures as the authentic word of God, he did not endorse every word in them as God's. He rejected some Torah texts as representing the original intention and will of God, such as Moses' divorce laws. And so Moses gave particular divorce laws, but in Mark chapter 10, verses 4 to 9, Jesus said, Moses said that, but here's what I'm going to teach you. So he changed that. He displaced Moses' laws governing vengeance. So there were certain laws. I mean, you can read some of the Hebrew Scripture and your mind can be boggled because there's so much violence. And they were horrible. You know, there's kind of ethnic cleansing going on. And yeah, so Jesus comes along with a new ethic, not vengeance, but rather active, non-violent resistance. He said, overcome evil with good. So Jesus completely changed that. His command to love your enemies, again, completely different. A total repudiation of Moses' genocidal commands. And it stands in judgment of Joshua's campaign of ethnic cleansing. So what we see in the Hebrew Scriptures, Jesus came on the scene, God in human form, to show us what God is really like. God is not a genocidal maniac. God does not command ethnic cleansing. That was the culture of the day, a warrior tribe seeing God in their image and attributing what they wanted to do in destroying people and saying God told us to do that. Okay, Jesus comes along and he goes, nah, love your enemies. That's God in human form. And so it's very important that we understand that when Jesus came along, he changed certain things. Matthew chapter 5, I'll touch on this next week, how Jesus changed many of the 10 Commandments, and including Exodus chapter 1, Exodus chapter 21, verses 23 to 25. And I think I can just pop this into your feed here. If there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. Not nice. Now, there are still some countries on planet Earth today who still enact this kind of thing. But we look at that through the eyes of Jesus Christ, because Jesus came along and he said, no, you've heard it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I say to you, and then he starts talking about turning the other cheek and all of that kind of stuff. All right. So Jesus comes along and he changes some of those things, and he brings in a much kinder and more loving ethic. Get it right. And of course, as we saw before, love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail next week. And I will also touch on Graham Crosson's question with regards to Christians and war. Is it ever right to fight? So I hope you can join me then. If you do have a question through the week, if you're reading scripture, if you're having a conversation with someone and something pops up and you think, wow, I'd love to get Rob's take on this, send me a message, okay? Facebook Messenger is the best way to communicate with me. So if we're friends on Facebook, you can do that. If you're not a friend on Facebook, just send me a friendship request and a message and says, I listen to Tuesday nights. Can you please accept my friendship request? I will do that. And then you can send me a message on Facebook Messenger and I'll get to your question over the next few weeks. Thank you so much for joining me. Hope to see you this weekend, either online or in person at Bayside Church. We'll be online Saturday at 6 p.m, Sunday at 10 a.m, in person at 10 a.m. And I'm going to be wrapping up this weekend the 4-part series on reimagining church. And so this weekend, I'm going to be teaching on future church. What will the church be like as we embrace our future together? Hope you can join me this weekend. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you soon. God bless you.